Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. Before we jump into today's presentation, you will receive the presentation slides, and this webinar will be recorded and made available to you. Please note on your attendee panel that there is a box to ask any questions as they come to you, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of the presentation. My name is Carrie Gillum, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Telemetry. We're so excited to be talking with you today about employee stories. Telling stories is one of the best ways to share information, to teach something, or convey something new in a way that your audience will remember. There are so many good books, personally, I've read on how to tell good stories and how much better we remember someone or something because it was told in a story. There was one Native American proverb I had read that said, "Tell me the facts and I'll learn. Tell me the truth and I'll believe. But tell me a story and it will live in my heart forever." As talent acquisition leaders, we're challenged with finding and engaging new talent every day to join our organizations. Telling employee stories as part of your recruiting process will capture the hearts and minds of those great future employees. So with that, I'd love to introduce our speakers today, Lauren Sargent and Stephen Schwander. Lauren is the co-founder.
Sorry to interrupt. I was
Thanks,
excited.
Lauren. No, that's great. We're excited to be here. Lauren is the co-founder at Stories Incorporated. Stories Inc. has collaborated with some of the most innovative employer branding teams in the world to develop powerful and authentic recruitment marketing content. Prior to starting Stories, Lauren was a talent acquisition manager for a publicly traded company and recruited for Fortune 500 companies as well as growing entrepreneurial environments. Stephen Schwander started his recruiting career in 1997 as a contingency technical recruiter for Wall Street Talent. He has 18 years of progressive experience in talent acquisition, including serving as the Director of Global Operations for Reuters. He has significant talent acquisition, operations, and enterprise implementation experience with several global clients across finance, manufacturing, telecommunications, and technology. He enjoys helping telemetry clients meet today's recruitment, sourcing, and marketing challenges. So welcome also, Stephen.
Thank you. Welcome. Good to be here too. And you can tell by that introduction, I started before the internet, right? So I have lots of nice, good recruiting stories.
Well, we're excited to have you both on today. So with that, let's jump into our agenda for today. Sorry about that. The importance of what we'll be talking about today is the importance of the candidate experience and the factors that contribute to a negative candidate experience, the impact of employer brand on that candidate experience, why employee stories are a solution for creating compelling branded content to recruit like-minded candidates, best practices on what to include in your employee stories, and how you can leverage stories for your diversity hiring or niche hiring recruiting strategies. So the first topic was the importance of the candidate experience and factors that can contribute to a negative candidate experience. So let me ask Stephen, first of all, can you share some of your experience and what you've seen, both the good and bad, on the candidate experience?
Absolutely. I think, one of the first things that comes to mind for me with candidate experience is, obviously what happens when people hit your website, no matter how they hit it, where they come from. The reality is that when we are engaging them on the career site, we're basically talking to people we don't know. The vast majority of people who are interacting with us, we don't even know them yet, right? So the quality of that experience, the quality of what they see, what they learn, this will sound odd, but even what they feel, if you will, right? The quality of that is going to determine whether or not they're going to stay there, if they're going to take the first step toward, conversion, et cetera. So what we've seen is that when that is a more pleasant experience, then ultimately there are vastly more conversions to applications or registrations or whatever your call to action might be. So it's vitally important to have a positive and engaging candidate experience when they come to your site. There's a lot of missed opportunities. So if you are familiar with the talent board studies that have come out in the past couple of years, they tell us that 31% of everyone who has had a bad experience, right? You can be, the bad experience itself is basically contributed to by, a lack of a positive employment brand or a lack of a positive company experience. Meaning, 31% of the people who say we just had a terrible time interacting with this company are saying it was primarily because of the lack of what the brand was doing for them and what the communication of the employer brand was happening to them, either on the communication side, or actually person to person, right? 9% of those folks, are reporting a disconnect between the job description and what was actually interviewed for, right? So they don't really understand what it's like to work at that company. 11% are reporting that it was just a company misfit, right? They really had no idea whether this was a place that they would fit in or not until it was way too late. And so that turned into a really bad experience. Another 11% of those that reported a bad experience really had bad rapport with the hiring manager. So again, there was no expectation of what to expect from a personal experience in terms of culture fit, the job and the actual hiring manager. A couple other things to think about in terms of candidate experiences. The talent board also asks every year, they ask the following question: how likely are you as a candidate for a job to refer somebody else for this job, right? So I went through the application process, I had the interview process, I didn't get a job. Would I recommend that somebody else apply to a job? Well, 82% of the candidates who had a great experience said, absolutely, I would refer this job to a friend of mine. But 84% of those who had a bad experience said they were unlikely or absolutely wouldn't even consider recommending other people for a job. So you can see, the impact of a negative experience. 35% of people who have a negative experience with your brand and your recruitment and candidate experience, 35% of those folks are probably going to share it on social media, right? So you're going to get dinged and be even in a worse branding hole. And 46% of candidates who have had a bad experience, if you're a consumer company, they're just going to stop buying from you, right? They'll drink another product, they'll fly another airline, they'll wear another pair of shoes. And so there's definitely some significant impact from candidate experience.
That's great input, Stephen. I think it's so important for us to understand that not only are we impacting our success as recruiters, but also to our company's bottom line, right? And even on the sales side. So the next topic was the impact of an employer brand on the candidate experience. Today's candidates are more than interested than just the title and salary, right? They want to know more about the company, more about the brand, what it's going to be like to work there. So could you, Stephen, just kind of share some of your experience both as a recruiter and working with recruiters every day to help them to establish their employer brand and the importance of this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we don't think that employer brand is important, all you have to do is, a little bit of research and realize, over the last 5 to 7 years, I think this has been a continued message on the part of researchers and, frankly, those people that are, looking to sell you some employer brand services. But the reality is, and I just heard on CNBC this past week that job quits, in other words, people leaving their jobs, is at a recent all-time high. Right. So right now, the candidate market is going active. Right. So, the brand is becoming that much more important. Right. So I think the first impact is that there's an increase in active and mildly active candidates. And so your messaging becomes that much more important in that environment. Second interesting trend, and this is not a study by LinkedIn, is that there's a clear move of top talent from finance to technology, which is kind of interesting. And what they're saying is that it's really being driven by employer brand and specifically by employer purpose, right? So what top talent is feeling about and experiencing about what an employer is all about and how, what value they bring to the wider community in the world by working for that organization. There's also a move to smaller organizations, right? So the big move from larger corporations, Fortune 500s, et cetera, into smaller corporations and startups. And so that kind of leads me to ask the question from a branding perspective: how do you make your company, regardless of its size, feel like that smaller size company? So this is some challenges around brand. Brandon Hall recently found that organizations that invest in a strong candidate experience, and that includes branding, are going to improve their quality of hire by over 50%. Another LinkedIn study found that candidates, this is kind of interesting, candidates, so people looking for jobs, right? They actually trust employees 3 times more than they trust the employer to provide information on the company that they're looking to work for. Wow, that's kind of obvious, but it's a pretty significant trust factor there. And then, we always talk about millennials, right? But the issue is as they drive into the workforce deeper and deeper, they still are overwhelmingly looking for a place to work where there is people that they can relate to and a culture that they can fit into. That same Talent Board report showed that 44% of candidates, they research a company before they even consider applying for that company, right? So they're not going to hit apply, drop that application into the ATS and then start doing their research. They're doing it before they click apply. So almost half of those people who research ahead of time are researching things like company values, culture, and purpose. And of those people for whom research is important, we already said that's 44% of the people, right? A third of those specifically want, and this is going to be no surprise at all to Lauren, specifically want employee testimonials. So yeah, so there's a huge impact of employer brand on the candidate experience for sure.
That's great, Stephen. Thanks. Lauren, can you maybe share with us some of the ways that employers, recruiters can improve the candidate experience?
Yes, definitely. And what's so interesting with what Stephen was saying about, people conducting so much research, and they're also looking about mission and purpose. And then we see on this chart that values is like the #1 thing that candidates are searching for and they're interested in. The #1 way to improve the candidate experience is to be really specific about what that experience is like. So for example, you may be seeing values, 50%, and you may think to yourself, well, it's great because I have all of my organization's values already listed on my website. Well, just because you say your culture, that one of your values is flexibility, that actually doesn't give candidates any insight into what your culture is. And that's one of the reasons why you would use stories. So really, the easiest way to improve the candidate experience is to give candidates what they really want. And it's a little bit, deeper than what we've talked about, because it's not just words, it's the proof. So, as I mentioned, flexibility, that's a value that you may see a lot of places. Transparency, but there's different levels of transparency, and there's candidates value different levels of transparency. So are you looking for an organization that's, like Bridgewater level of transparency, which is radical transparency, or an organization that's just going to share, their financial information with you once a month? There's a big difference. So I think that there's like a low-hanging fruit here for all of us that are looking to improve the candidate experience through our employer brand and recruitment marketing content, which is just to be much, much more specific. We're still today not seeing a lot of that, the types of content that really turns you off or on. We're seeing a lot of generic content still around the themes that candidates are telling us are important, but not really giving them the substance that they need to make a decision.
Great. So our next topic area was why employee stories are a solution for compelling branded contact to recruit like-minded candidates. And Lauren, maybe you can share some of what you guys have seen and why we so often talk about using stories.
Yeah, I'd say, one thing that Stories Inc. talks about a lot is, one of the reasons why you would use stories is generally, it's a brain thing. So we think in cause and effect. That's the easiest way to communicate concepts like mission, vision, values. Our brain is already thinking in cause and effect, so to tell a story that brings that to life is just easier for candidates to understand. Also, when we hear a story, our brain releases chemicals like oxytocin and dopamine and cortisol. So really what that means is that we feel like it's happening to us, even when it isn't. So really, stories are the only way to give someone an experience if they're not there experiencing it with you. If you tell them a story, they actually feel like they are. And you know, all of this is really important because it means that it's memorable content. And why that matters is kind of information overload of today. You know, Stephen was just talking about how much candidates are researching. Candidates can go 2 to 18 places before they apply somewhere, and they may not do that all at once. That could be on their phone on the way home from the metro. It may be sitting down at a desktop, but it may not be, you know, one intake of all this information. So if they're going to your site or viewing your content, they may be viewing your competitors. So it's just a lot of information that candidates are consuming before they apply. And you just want to make sure that whatever you're putting out there is memorable for that reason. So I think that you need to make an impression. Another reason is that, you know, for number 2 on this list, they, you know, really specifics ultimately get candidates to opt in and opt out. So it doesn't really help you if you have a bunch of candidates, like if the majority of your applicant pool are never going to really fit into your culture at the end of the day anyway. So stories allow you to communicate what's really distinct and unique about your employee experience, and that should really be the goal of your content. So that's just something to think about. You want to have stories that are slightly polarizing, where the right people are so excited, can't wait to join and apply, and the wrong people, the content was interesting enough that they know who to reply or who is a fit, but they're kind of moving on to the next place that may be a better fit for them. And I'd say, you know, another reason to use stories in recruitment marketing content and just throughout your candidate experience is that it's a really great candidate closing technique. So, you know, it's kind of like when I was a recruiter, I also started in contingency recruiting like Stephen. So, you know, to schedule the interview during rush hour, for example, when you know that your client company has a better commute. So you really are putting candidates in the, you know, in the situation where they're working for that organization. So you really, stories are the best way to have candidates identify with the storyteller, picturing themselves in the environment, and then hopefully want to make a change to be there. And, you know, that's the easiest way to show what it's like to be an engineer at your company, or a woman in tech, or an intern, or, you know, hearing future coworkers talk about relatable personal or professional moments that the company did for them. So stories kind of do it all. So I'd say that those are kind of are why, you know, you should use employee stories to recruit like-minded candidates.
Okay.
So this is best practices on what to include. So we get this a lot at Stories Inc. of what should a story have to be effective culture content. And there's lots of ways you can approach it, but these are my, you know, 4 things I would think that are really important. And these are actually, I guess these are some of the questions that we would ask, which the first would be, you know, what was the moment you knew you made the right decision to work here? So that is important because it gets at a moment of what the organization did for that person. So the moment you knew that you made the right decision, the moment you knew you made your best friend at work, but that really does get to a story, something that the organization did. And the second would, you know, what was your best day at work? So that really gets your storytellers, which would be your employees, thinking about moments that really worked out well for the organization and for them, and really celebrating, you know, the fun that you have at work, but also some of the moments that were really important there too. And then getting to that third thought of what can only happen at that organization. So how do you make your experience look unique? Is, you know, what's something that happened that can only happen here is a really good question. Also, to get to the best stories are personal in nature. So something like, you know, what are you most proud of is really great as well, because it gets the storyteller thinking about their own personal and professional accomplishments. And that also helps bring some interesting stories that storytellers can, or your candidates can relate to. I would go to the next one. So leveraging stories for diversity hiring or niche hiring recruiting strategies is something that people ask about all the time as well. And we know that, you know, diverse teams make stronger teams. One of the ways that Stories Inc. approaches this, as you can imagine, is we get stories from individuals that show what the organization is doing for them. So, for example, one of my favorite stories that Stories Inc. Received once, or that we extracted from one of our clients, is someone that has a hearing impairment, and she was saying that at other environments she used to really hide the fact that she was deaf. But at BAE, which is our client site, she felt very comfortable being herself and was even promoted into a client-facing role because they really didn't see her disability impacting her ability to do great work with clients face-to-face. So that made her feel like it was an inclusive environment because of what they've done for her. So those types of stories that really show what your organization does for those that they're looking to hire to improve their diverse employee base. We heard another really great story from Dell, where someone that had been a veteran had a really hard time transitioning out of the military into the corporate world. So she was down on her luck, had a string of really terrible personal luck, and ended up interviewing at Dell. And she was actually, once she was hired, she was given some tips from people who had been there before as to how to transition into a corporate environment. She was so inspired, and so it affected her so much, so deeply, personally and professionally, that she went ahead and is part of a program where she and other veterans at Dell are devoting their time to helping transitioning people that are in the military transitioning, helping them review their resumes. So that they don't make some of the same mistakes that she did when it was so difficult for her to transition. So that would also be a good story about how Dell has this program. They really support veterans, and in fact, veterans are so inspired they're giving back. So
Lauren,
go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, Lauren, I'm going to jump in for a second, and then maybe we can hear some stories that from specific companies. But just you mentioned two things, right? Number one, you mentioned diversity. Number two, you mentioned military hiring. And from a recruitment marketing perspective, right? Those would be what we would consider at telemetry to be audiences, right? The value of stories to actually hit the specific needs or concerns of targeted audiences is also extremely powerful. And the importance to have a technology that's going to help you drive that, right? So if military is certainly not it's not a message that would play with me because I wasn't in the military. I don't come from a military family. But if it was, right, so let's say for the sake of argument, I'm out on a military jobs site and your job is posted out there, to have the technology that recognizes when I hit your career site that I came from a military job posting. If your technology is smart enough, the story that you produced when that person hits that landing page should be your military story. And the same thing with a diversity candidate. If they're coming to your career site from a known diversity source or diversity content area, the ability to serve up content that's relevant to who your target audience is or who the audience represents from the visitor that comes through is extremely powerful. And so just wanted to kind of say that thing just in terms of the operations and the technology behind being able to deliver the right stories to the right people at the right time.
It's just awesome. I mean, it's just great, and especially for improving the candidate experience. Of course, giving candidates what they want, which is insight into the organization, but giving it when they want it, which is immediately and tailored to their personal interests or their background, is just awesome these days.
Yep.
So oftentimes we're asked of examples of how you can use stories throughout the candidate experience, and clearly for awareness. So CVS is an example where they're using 15-second teasers, the beginning of a story, for example, through Instagram or Twitter that leads you to the rest of the story. That's a really, really great for awareness. Dell does a really good job with their blog posts. So they actually, their careers blog is integrated with their regular blog. So if you are a consumer of Dell doing a search and you land on an article, that is related to their product, right next to that content are employee stories, which is really great for awareness too. So all of a sudden you're reading about that veterans program that I mentioned, for example. If you're a veteran, you may be clicking on that, even though you weren't thinking about being a candidate. And when it comes to blogs, which kind of transitioning a little bit from awareness into consideration, Sodexo has a careers blog that's filled with employee stories, and it's often cited by their internal candidates as well as their external candidates as one of the most helpful resources during the interview process. So for that consideration phase of candidate that's aware of the organization and applying, but wants more information, an employee blog filled with stories is really great. And of course, during the consideration phase, your career site is huge. So the CSL Behring is a company we worked with that has this tagline of promising futures, and their career site is just filled with stories that are all focused on very specific career paths, which for them, promising futures could mean a linear path of when you start and you go through the defined rungs of leadership, or it could be one person was able to move all around the world and see lots of different environments, or it could be, we spoke to someone who advanced technically and she mentored a lot of leaders, but she decided to stay in the lab. So that's another way your career site, sticking with a theme or even just general stories too, is great. So here's a plug for our company where this is a job description. So we put a story-based video, so stories filled about our culture in the middle of our job description. So that's another place for consideration. So as candidates move through the process, as they're thinking about applying, they may land on a job description. There's story-based content there too.
Lauren, could you talk a little bit, based on your experience, on the length and how long these videos should be, depending on where the candidate is at in the candidate experience or journey?
That is a great question. Yes. So I'd say for attraction and just awareness, something that grabs attention. So kind of like, as I mentioned, the CVS thought of like a 15-second story that may lead to something longer, but it's all about just grabbing your attention. Once you go further and further through the stages, you want more and more information and are more willing and actually looking for content that's a little bit more substantive and longer. So, for example, we worked with a government contractor where we made 3 videos that were 5 minutes long, and that's kind of like a cardinal sin sometimes in marketing. It's like a really long video, but he really didn't want to cut anything. And at the end of the day, there were several candidates that made it to his process, to the end of the process, where he was, in some cases, the last step, and they had absolutely watched every last second of the video. But I would say that could be because they were going to meet with the CEO. So if you're going to meet with, the hiring manager, you're in an advanced stage, you want to be as prepared as possible. So I'd say that shorter towards the front, but then as the candidate advances and you're thinking about their journey, putting in more substantive pieces are really great. Dell has seen a lot of success with their blogs, and they're long form. They have a video in the middle and they have some slide share at the bottom, but it is something to sit and read, and they have seen some success at that. But that's usually when a candidate's really hungry for more information.
Lauren, I'm gonna ask you a question too. Just this totally comes from my experience and kind of question of what you're seeing today. So back in about maybe 2006, 2007, I was working for a global Fortune 500 company, and we really saw the importance at the time of employee testimonials. And at the time, we literally went around the world asking these types of questions before we knew that it was the best practice, right? And taking pictures and then putting these stories up on the career site. But to be honest with you, we didn't go out and hire high-end photographers. We didn't glossy. It was very gritty, very down to earth, very real. And then our company got bought by a larger company, and all of that got thrown out the window. And all of a sudden, we had really high gloss. Actually, I don't even think half the pictures were of employees, etc. And fast forward a couple of years, I worked for a large global bank, and there again, the the production value of the employee stories that we were sharing was very, very high. And a lot of, at that time, a lot of the employee stories was more human interest, right? Can I relate to this person? So, given all that, where we've been over the last 10, 12 years, what really is the best practice now in terms of, production quality, versus just, being real? There, enough said, right? I mean, how would you advise people in terms of how they put this stuff together from a production and content perspective?
Yes, I realize I'm biased because our content looks a certain way, but I would say that you want it to be as accessible as possible, but without any of the visuals distracting the candidate. So for example, a video that's, sometimes you can film great videos on iPhones, but sometimes you can't hear what people are saying, or, it's muffled, or you're distracted by a bright light, or whatever it may be. So I happen to think that professional is great just because it eliminates some of the distractions for the candidate. And as well, using employee stories, I do think requires, to get a really great story does require you to sit and think and ask some really good questions. So it's not necessarily videos that are made on the fly. They're a little bit more thoughtful. So you're allowed to kind of set up and plan. And if that's the case, then I think that you should include, professional looking content, especially to make your employee storytellers, to get them really, really comfortable sharing with you, making them, I happen to think a lot of our storytellers will take a picture of what they look like and then show them if they're nervous, oh, is this blouse okay, or whatever it may be, which could distract them from actually what they're planning on saying or what they want to say. So I think that eliminates some of the stress for the storyteller too. If they know that they're lit professionally and they look really nice, they're not going to hate the video because they wish that, they weren't blinded by, half their face or something like that. So my thought is that the quality should be accessible. I mean, I think polished content is great, but if you are going for employee stories and you want to be real, I think a step in between completely homemade and super professional is the best way to go. But realize I'm biased. That's kind of content we create because that's what we think is best.
I love it though, because I think it took that whole experience that I just shared, right, and brought it to a sort of a kind of brought all of that together to a best practice. So I really appreciate the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and there's, examples of also content that you can use that is untraditional, or places in the candidate experience that are untraditional. So we talked about the attraction phase, and then when you're going to meet with the CEO, that's the other extreme, like the last stage. But there's some other things that you can do with your story-based content that candidates really appreciate through the experience, or to kind of bolster the experience. So one example would be, we worked with a company called The Motley Fool, and we developed an interactive employee handbook. So for all intents and purposes, this is their handbook for all their employees. Like when you join, you get the handbook for sure. This is it. But it's also turned externally so anybody can view it. And when we measured the traffic a few years ago, a lot of the traffic was coming from external sources, like candidate searching traffic. So that's also a really good thought, is to take some of your internal content that features stories and turn it external, because candidates are looking for that anyway. So you can think about rewards and recognition content, things like that. You can kind of turn to the external audience. And on this side, we designed this like really nice PDF using developer stories. And that's used throughout the entire process, when you're after your phone screen or before the interview, but it's just kind of a really fun PDF. So there's lots of things you can do with the content. And to your point, Stephen, I mean, this is, professional looking content for sure. It's a nicely designed, professionally designed PDF. There are tools you can use like Canva that can, mimic that if you're doing your own content, but you can, it's definitely something that you can make look professional too.
And I think another point on going back to the question on how professional do they need to be, certainly I think you're going to give a better image of your company and tell a better story having them professionally done. But one of the most important things I know, even when we've talked with diversity experts in the past, is just making sure it's genuine, it's sincere, and it's real. So I'm sure, Lauren, you guys see that and make sure that that's coming through in your best practices.
Yes, definitely. Most important thing. that it's true and it's real, and you're featuring, featuring employees, for sure.
Right. Any other examples, Lauren, or stories about that you've created for your customers using for their diversity audiences?
Yes, so we did a project with Dell. I know I've talked about them a lot through our conversation today, but they really approached it where they had, diversity, but also some talent niches, and also looking at what content holes they had throughout the organization. So we focused just on veterans, which I know I mentioned earlier a story about that. Women in technology, so that's something where we spoke to, I think, something like 20 women, and then created content around their stories for them to use everywhere throughout the entire candidate experience, and then featured on sites like Fairy Godboss. But we've definitely been able to kind of concentrate on just a niche, or a specific diverse group that an organization wants more of, especially companies that are, Intel's a good example. I think they're trying to hire a certain amount of women by 2020. So there's definitely those that have aggressive goals and have made it public that that's what their organization is going to look like in the future. I think that's also a really great opportunity to talk to the women who are benefiting from some of their policies and just getting real stories of support from women. So I'd say, yeah, those are some examples of content we've created around targeting a diverse candidate.
Great, thank you. Stephen, can you maybe share a little bit where on the career site these employee stories should be, right? So Lauren has had great success in creating these compelling employee stories with her clients, but where on the career site, where in the candidate journey should they be?
I think they probably have, it depends on what you want your journey to be, but I can see them being positioned in many places on the career site. So, as I said earlier, when you land on the landing page of the career site, if you happen to be coming from, let's say, a diversity site or a military site, then why not have a story video pop up on the page so that I could click it because I came from the military, job posting, right? If you have a career site that can target audiences, so let's say you have job family audiences, or you have cohort audiences that you want to market to, and you have a special landing page, then that's a great place for for those videos to pop up as well. So I think the best thing is if you can pop up the video in a place that makes sense, where people are trying to learn about a job family, or learn about a company, or learn about what it's like to work in a specific group, that those stories could be right there and they don't have to go digging for them on some sort of back page someplace. They can also be used in some of your outbound marketing strategies and content, right? So let's say you're sending we have a client, for example, that sends out almost 500,000 emails during November for Veterans Day, right? So why not include a link to a video on that email that goes out, right? Or if you have a specific campaign, you include it in the email, or maybe you have a text campaign where there's a link to the video and they can consume it right there. And then, what you do, at the end of that video too, is there a call to action that you'd like to encourage people? So you can actually embed calls to action in videos as well, right? So when I'm done with the video, would you like to learn more? And here's the link. Give me your LinkedIn profile, and we'll tell you more about what we're doing in this area, in our company. And now you have just turned an unknown user or visitor into somebody and can actually market to. And not only do you know who they are, but because they watched that video and they took the call to action on that video, well, now you know a little bit more about them. Either, if it's a military video, they might be interested in that. If it's a diversity video, they might be interested in that. If it's a specific, job family area, they're going to be interested in that. So it's not only about where these videos can be surfaced in your technology, it's then also about what kind of tracking do you have on the folks that are consuming this content, and how does that make you a more intelligent marketer, right, of jobs and job content to them based upon the fact that they consumed that video.
Great. So we do have a few questions that have come in that I think it would be a good time to pose those questions to our panelists. If anybody else does have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the question box. One question, in both to Lauren and Stephen, I think is appropriate, is how many employee stories should we have on our career site?
Yes, it really varies, I think, for how large your organization, but I think a general rule would be, because we know candidates are searching for content around culture, to create content that definitely speaks to purpose or mission, so why your organization does what they do, plus if you have values, either a video or some kind of content around your values. I think something that we've seen a lot, which I really like, is treating each value on its own. So creating content for each value. I think depending on how many personas or how many targets you have, that's how much content you should be thinking about making. And the good thing is stories are so versatile. One story could fit into a video if trust is one of your values, but could also fit in a video that targets, college students if the storyteller is an intern, for example. So I'd say thinking through, what types of people you're targeting in addition to the culture content. So it could be interns and veterans, or it could be scientists and engineers and salespeople. So developing one per, technical category, as well as one per, special niche group. So I think there's lots of ways to approach it, and I think that stories are versatile, so you should do it as much as you can. Develop content that talks to each audience specifically. So I hopefully that can answer your question, but I do think that there's lots of ways to approach it.
You know what? I'm going to totally agree with you because
Oh, good.
and yeah, well, and again, I think a huge dependency is how good is your career site marketing platform? So
Yes.
if I've got a ton of videos and it just feels like I'm sitting there on a YouTube channel and just bumping through videos, obviously that's not even candidate experience. But again, if you back it up and say, listen, do we have the intelligence to be able to deliver a couple of really good videos that are relevant to the user that's on that specific page? It doesn't matter how many there are. The right one's going to pop up at the right time. Then the more is absolutely better, right? I think one question then is you have to understand your own stories, right? And what keeps stories fresh and relevant. And when you need to take one down and maybe put a new one up, and how do you manage stories for employees who have actually left the company, and how do you manage that? So then there's an operational question there, but I think from a candidate experience question, the more the better.
Yes, especially if you can be targeted and personalized, like you were mentioning earlier. That's the best.
Yep.
Great, thank you both. Lauren, this is probably targeted to you. What are some tips for getting good stories from your employees?
Yeah, that is a good question. So I'd say making the person feel as comfortable as possible, and that could look very different depending on your organization. But I know at Stories Inc. we prep people lightly, so just enough so they're comfortable, but not enough so that they're scripted. And I think that's a really good goal to shoot for, like in the middle there. So maybe sending a few questions ahead of time, similar to some of the questions that we talked about earlier, like what happened on your favorite day of work, or when's the moment you knew you made the right decision. Those are kind of softball, easy questions that get people thinking in stories, but it's not overwhelming, and someone's likely not to appear overcoached, as opposed to if you're giving them 10 questions that they've been get nervous about and rehearse. So I'd say one tip is just to make the storyteller feel as comfortable as possible with a light prep. I mentioned earlier, if you are using professional equipment, is to let them, if someone seems concerned about their appearance, is it letting them see everyone looks awesome in great lighting? So I think that's a good tip to make someone comfortable. And then just reassuring them that you're really only going to take the best content, which may be 30 seconds. So if you're with them for half an hour, allow them to, tell stories several different ways. Ask them to, you can repeat things. You can ask them a lot of different questions, but just making sure that they know that you have got their back in terms of wanting them to tell a great story and appear personable in themselves on camera. I think those are some really good tips for getting good content from your employees.
Great. Lauren, how long should a story content last?
Yeah, that's a good question. We get a lot of, that's something that we're asked about a lot. So I'd say, where our perspective that if you're using an employee story, if it's still what an organization would do today, even if that person left, it's okay to use it. So for example, one of our favorite stories that we share a lot is a young woman who was going for emergency surgery. She called her manager and told her that she was scared and what was happening. And when she woke up, he was in the waiting room. So that's a really great story that even if she leaves, it's still about what leadership does when someone has a personal tragedy. And if that's still true, I think it's okay to use it, even if that person is left. Of course, the exception is if someone leaves because of something that's happened that isn't great. It's just not a mutual or, a great send-off. That's something that you should rethink. But as long as the story is strong and it's still true, true representation about what life is like at your organization, I think it's okay to use it. We've had some clients that have used our content for years, and then we have others that rotate every 6 months. So it really depends on, like Stephen was saying earlier, about kind of like how you're operationalizing things and who's there managing it. But know that if you don't have a lot of support, it can last a bit longer if you use the story.
Great. Well, that's all of the questions that I see. So thank you both, Lauren and Stephen, for great insights and great expertise sharing with our audience today. I hope everybody has learned something and can take it back to incorporate into your stories.
Thanks for having us. That was fun.
Absolutely, yeah. I love this conversation. Thank you.
Great. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks.